Welcome. We read St. Luke's Gospel for today. John summoned two of his disciples and sent them to the Lord to ask, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we look for another?" When the men came to the Lord, they said, "John the Baptist has sent us to ask you, are you the one who is to come, or should we look for another?" At that time, Jesus cured many of the diseases, sufferings, and evils. He also granted sight to many who were blind. And Jesus said to them in reply, "Go and tell what you have seen and heard. The blind regain their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, and the dead are raised. The poor have the good news proclaimed to them. And blessed is the one who takes no offense in me." The Gospel of the Lord. In reading the Gospel, there are a couple of undercurrents that struck me. One is John the Baptist still doesn't know, at least fully, whether Jesus is the Messiah. He suspects from the baptism experience that they had. But maybe more to the point, his followers are aware that John is receding, that he's not as prominent, that he's been arrested. And they want to know who they should follow. And so he sends them rather than tells them and says, "Ask them." And Jesus gives that list. But he does it in a way that strikes me. I must confess that in my own mind, if someone comes and says, "Tell me, are you the one?" and I had a list like Jesus, I think I would find myself saying, "Well, I cured the blind, and I cured those who were lame and those lepers and the deaf. I even brought people back to life." That's my resume. I think business would say, you got to sell it if you're really trying to put yourself forward, advance, be honored. And Jesus doesn't at all. Like John the Baptist, he's not interested in self-promotion, so to speak. He's interested in his Father's will, and he's interested in communicating that to all the peoples with whom he comes into contact. And so he says to John's followers, "Go tell them what you've seen, what you've witnessed." And then he makes that list. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, and the dead are brought back to life. But then I look at that too, and I say, that's God's stuff. I can't do that. I can't imitate. I can't even follow that. But then the last line before he dismisses them, he says, "Make sure that you tell them the poor have the good news proclaimed." And there it is. The list that comes first is God's miracles. But the poor having the good news proclaimed is something all human beings are expected to do. And that's what Jesus is leaving them with. I proclaim the good news. And what is that? It's that God loves every human being created. He doesn't try to explain the difficulties and crosses that the deaf and the blind and the lepers and even people suffering death endure. He's not justifying, he's not defending, He simply tries to cure some of them. But the proclamation of the good news that we're loved by God and that he lives in us and with us is something not only can we proclaim, but we can give witness and example by the way we live the gospel. And that's something all of us share. That like John the Baptist, like Jesus in his humanity, like Mary and Joseph during these weeks of Advent, all of them have God in them. They're temples, as we say. And so are we. And we're told in baptism to preach to all nations, not to perform miracles, not to change the world, not to explain things away, but rather to preach the good news by the way we share the love we experience from God with everyone. And there is the inclusion of everyone, all those who are ostracized or fenced off in society, as lepers used to be in Jesus' time. Jesus embraces and preaches and accepts everyone. He doesn't use labels. He doesn't exclude, but rather is inclusive. And that's what he's saying. The good news is preached, not by words, but the way I live my life. And then all of a sudden, I realize that once again, Jesus is doing it right. That if I listen with faith, if I am open and really accept the presence of God in the scriptures, then it connects. It makes sense. I understand more clearly what Jesus is asking of me. We all can do that. The challenge I have is then to live it. And there's prayer every day. Do I believe that God is in me? Do I believe God is in you? Do I believe this moment, in whatever the circumstances that I may experience today, that I can preach the good news by living, not talking, by living the experience of love and inclusion and forgiveness? That's the challenge. And I don't have to do it alone. Miracles, they may happen, but they're not going to be because of me. But that God will influence other people in miraculous ways, could be, but that's not my problem. It's not even my business. My business is to determine what is it I believe, what is the gift of faith that I have, and then to live it. Does God love me? Do I believe that? Is he forgiving and embracing? Do I believe that? And if so, then I preach that by doing it, by trying to imitate God in sharing my love and my forgiveness and my gift of inclusion. It's not easy, but it makes all the difference in the world. Have a good day and keep praying for one another and stay safe.